Pentecost is a Jewish harvest holiday. In Hebrew, it's known as Shavuot. Shavuot means weeks, and it marks the day after 7 weeks after Passover. And if you feel like it's too early in the morning to do math, I agree. So I ciphered it out, and I'll share it. 7 weeks times 7 days in a week equals 49 plus 1 for the day after, and voila, 50. Now it just so happens, and I think this is very cool, it just so happens that this year Shavuot began last night. Jewish calendar days go from sunset to sunset, which means that this year the Christian Pentecost lines up precisely with the Jewish Pentecost, just as it did almost 2,000 years ago. Shavuot signifies two big events. It marks the wheat harvest in the land of Israel, which is a very important day. And it also celebrates the day that God gave the Torah to the Jews at Mount Sinai. Mind you, Shavuot, Pentecost, observes the 50th day since Passover, originally when Moses led the Jews out of bondage in Egypt. On the 50th day, he was given the Ten Commandments. So there's a nice corollary here between the two Pentecosts. For the first century Jews, it marked the beginning of the Jewish people as a nation. They now had God's law, the Torah, to bind them together in community. And for Christians, this dramatic outpouring of the Holy Spirit on Pentecost is seen, as we say, the beginning of the church for Jesus' followers. In both great traditions, Pentecost was the birth of community. The Presbyterian Church says Jesus of Nazareth offered the perfect human response to God, and that a Christian's personal response to God is in community. What's hard for us to really understand these days is that community is changing. About 15 years ago, a guy named Charles Wiley, who was then Associate for Theology for the Presbyterian Church USA, said he felt we were at a critical juncture in this church's history, adding, at this time we need nothing more than we need honesty. Better public relations will not carry us forward to a better place. Speaking the truth in love just might. He foresaw an uncertain future where the Presbyterian Church is no longer mainline nor a denomination, arguing that this painful path is the way we must take in order to develop a robust ecclesiology for a new day. Wiley came to the Presbyterian Church from another tradition, and he said that when he was in seminary as a new Presbyterian, he noticed the way that folks told the story of Presbyterianism. It almost always started something like this: Presbyterians have featured prominently in United States history. And that's true. The Presbyterian Church was important to the Republic. Many say the governmental structure of the U.S. was modeled on Presbyterian polity. If you've served on session, you might see those similarities. Some say the two systems developed at the same time in the same cultural and philosophical climate. But 10 U.S. presidents have claimed to be Presbyterians. The only active clergyman to sign the Declaration of Independence was Presbyterian John Witherspoon. And Wiley said much of this history was an identity-creating story. We Presbyterians are, in a word, important. And we can prove it to you by showing you how important we have been in our nation's history. But Wiley adds that it's no longer true that we're important as an institution. Even if Presbyterians hold positions of power in the government, as an institution, that cultural power is at best a nostalgic memory. He said nobody in power is really listening anymore to the mainline churches, despite all the God Bless Americas and faith-based initiatives from political officials. There was a time when the stated clerk of the Presbyterian General Assembly could just pick up the phone and call President Eisenhower on a matter of church concern. Those days are gone. I like an image Wiley invokes. He says, for a long time, mainline American Protestantism was like an aging dowager living in a decaying mansion on the edge of town, bankrupt and penniless, house decaying around her, but acting as if her family still controlled the city. As we try to understand where we are and where we might point ourselves going forward, we have to let go of decades and centuries of these internalized identities. We have to let go of having been the dominant force. It's not 1950 anymore. It's not 1970. It's not 1990. It's not even 2009. The world around us has changed, and we have to seek new understanding so that we might wisely separate the wheat from the chaff. There are elements of the tradition that will help give us context and serve as an inspirational link to our story throughout the ages. But when we stop evolving, tradition becomes history. And if we are all tradition, we too shall become history. Likewise, a future without tradition is rootless and abandons thousands of years of dreams and striving and hard work by millions of people who did little things throughout the march of time in order that someday we would be able to come together as we do now. Wiley said, our future lies in being church, not just another option on the religious landscape. So part of our current journey, and we've been talking about this a lot, we're going to have another conversation tomorrow night at 7 o'clock if you can join us. But part of our current journey is to look around and ask, what's life-giving here? What's holy here? What's eternal and universal? That's one of the reasons I thought today, when Pentecost celebrates the birth of the church, and we often talk about what it was like when all those people started speaking in different languages. And I thought today we needed to go back to an earlier moment. As we peel back all of this, let's go back to an earlier moment before that great shining Pentecost day, to that moment when Jesus invited Peter to follow, and he did. That moment when there were no beautiful buildings and no stained glass windows and no organ and no sound system and no committees. A moment on an ordinary day when an ordinary guy was out doing ordinary work, and a stranger stumbled upon him and invited him in. Invited him into a world where people care about each other. A world where people live together in justice. A world where the least among us are embraced with the deepest of our compassion. And that ordinary guy said yes. Jesus had his understanding of Judaism, and the ministry God gave him didn't include trying to refashion the prayer service at the synagogue. He didn't try to make his message more appealing or sexier. In fact, he didn't try to even make it popular. Though he had developed a following, he also was wildly unpopular. And while he's known for being the great comforter, he was also the great challenger. We have such deeply held ideas of who we are and what we're doing. And in a way, our birthday, sometimes when we celebrate this in a service, we reinforce those deeply held ideas. Yet our journey now is to peel back those ideas like layers of an onion, not to get rid of all our ideas or any specific idea, but to find the seed of who we are, to rediscover the truth of who we are, to have the courage to be honest with who we are, to understand what we do and why we ever came together in the first place. The world community is changing, but the need for community is everlasting from age to age. And this is the message of all the greatest prophets. So on this, the 1967th birthday of the church, give or take a few, we remember that sweet moment when a compassionate stranger offered encouragement to a struggling and despairing fisherman. And he said, "Do not be afraid. From now on, you will be fishing for people." Will you please pray with me?